And hello, Diana. Welcome to our little party. We're in the last two sessions of this one, but I have a brand new study of John starting on the 10th. So I'll make sure that you get information about that.
So
All right,
we are
everyone.
meeting on Saturday?
What's that?
We are meeting on Saturday then?
Yes, we'll meet today and on Saturday at 10, depending upon how today's session concludes. I'm thinking of Saturday as a little bit of a blend of maybe finishing up some lecture points and then a little bit of group interaction, sharing and Q&A on Saturday at 10, from 10 until 11 for any that want to do that.
Sounds great.
Father Nathan,
Yes.
how long will the videos be up on YouTube
I
from this
think
session?
until the second coming of Christ, whenever that is.
Okay, because after the time zone change, I'm missing this. This Saturday will be my fourth Saturday that I'm not here. I've got a conflict. I have another thing that happens after this. So
Yeah.
I
Well,
just
once
want to be
they're
able to
posted
fill
my
in the
YouTube-
holes.
There's stuff on my YouTube site that's like 10 years old now, so it's not going anywhere. There's no reason to take it down. They don't charge you, by the square inch on YouTube. Once it's there,
Ah,
you just leave it there.
okay, thank you.
Sure. Okay, let's say our prayer, shall we? We pray in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Lord, we love you and we want to love you more. We're grateful for this day and all its many blessings. We thank you for our health, for all who love us, for any who don't love us, who challenge us to grow more deeply in our capacity to understand and to forgive, to be patient. We ask now for the help of St. Michael the Archangel. Please stand guard over us and help us be free from all distraction and any thing that would do us harm. We call on Holy Mary and St. Joseph. Ask your gracious presence with us wherever we are. We call on St. Dominic and St. Francis, St. Mary Magdalene, and the women who were at the tomb. I call on Carlo and Anna Maria, the members of our family lines who are in the light, who might like to join us for this time. Have you others that you'd like to include? If so, just unmute yourself and say their name or say their name in your heart.
John and Clara.
Saint Clare of Assisi.
Saint Teresa of Avila and Saint Gerard.
Holy Spirit, please give us gracious listening. Help us open our hearts to have planted in them the seed that you would most like to see grow. Give us gracious speech and help us to be in the flow of your grace so that your highest hopes for this call might be manifest. Please bless all those who are in their last days of preparation to receive the Easter sacraments and all those who will be busy with preparing services and trying to do all that while keeping people safe during this pandemic. Help us to focus and give us great attention and joy in this message through Christ our Lord. Amen. All right. I went back on YouTube to look at the end of our last session because I also preached on the weekend for the first time away from my home in a year and 2 weeks. And so I've had these texts in my head and I couldn't remember where I left off with you. So I went back this morning and looked at the YouTube. And we left off at the at chapter 14, verse 52, which is a place that I've always thought was just so compelling. And as a writer, I just admire the way that the author of Mark's Gospel did this. You remember, they've come out with swords and clubs to arrest Jesus. But now the moment has arrived, the scriptures will be fulfilled. And it says, with that, they panta, all of them, panta, they deserted him, all of them, and fled. There was a young man who accompanied him. And I made the point of saying, remember, P-A-N is in that word. It's one with whom he ate bread. And remember, they had been at the table not very much earlier in the flow of the conversation in the text. Somebody with whom he ate bread was following him, covered by nothing but a linen cloth. They seized him. He left the cloth behind and ran off absolutely naked. No underwear, just a cloth, a naked body with just this one white thing wrapped around him. And I'm quite sure that that's a baptismal garment. That's what that's all about. Diana, may I call on you?
You can call on me, but I don't know how I'll respond.
Well, I don't remember. Did I do Mason's baptism?
Yes, you baptized Mason.
And that might have been, that's what, 18 years ago, 19?
Yes, it was a Monday service right after Holy Family Sunday in December.
I don't remember, but during that period, about that many years ago, it was popular that babies be baptized naked. Was that the case that day, or do you remember?
No, he had a garment of white, and he had
I think it
another
was-
garment that he changed into, so he was not naked.
There used to be a little side table sort of off stage where all the baby's other clothes would be, but when it was time for them to be baptized, they were just in a diaper. And the diaper would come off just at the right moment because, you know, there was always the possibility of some unfortunate incident. But the diaper would come off just at the critical moment. The baby would be dunked, brought out, and then wrapped in a white garment. The godparent would be standing there ready with the white garment. And I mentioned last time that in the ancient church, deaconesses assisted at the baptisms of women and deacons at the baptisms of men, and they were gender segregated because of the nudity. And so that was one of those attempts after Vatican II to kind of go back to that tradition. It lasted for a little while. It kind of fell out of favor. And I was wondering if Mason might have been around for that part of it. Anyway, I think the young man dressed in white is absolutely somebody, he's the baptized. And the word panta is in that sentence. They all deserted him, like the pandemic. It means the everywhere sickness. Pan means everywhere or everything. They all deserted him. And one of the ways that gets put in the text is that there's a young man dressed in white who's unnamed because he's an every person. He's the whole church. He's the baptized. So that if we want to blame Judas, for example, you know, if we want to point the finger at somebody, and if only they hadn't done the bad thing, this whole story would have had a different ending. No, everybody took part. And one of the ways that Mark points that out is by including this reference to this young man dressed in white. All right, we're now at verse 53, which is kind of where we start today. Somebody's got some noise going on at your desk. I don't know if you're moving papers around or something, but there's you might need to mute. There's somebody that's bringing a bunch of noise. Then they led Jesus off to the high priest. So now they're moving from where he's arrested to the high priest's house. The elders and the scribes come together, and Peter follows him from a distance. That's going to show up all throughout the rest of the story. People are going to try to have it both ways. They're going to follow him, but they're going to do it from a distance. Have you ever tried that? Either the following of Jesus. Hey, how about for married people? Have you ever tried to be married from a distance? I don't mean like across the country. I mean in the same room. Have you ever tried to, do you get the idea of trying to be only partly present to something because being more present to it than that might cost you in ways that would be uncomfortable? That runs through the ending of the gospel. People trying to follow Jesus, but trying to have it both ways, kind of hedge their bets. And he obviously is all in, but his followers are trying to have one foot in and one foot out. Peter at least is, you got to give him credit. He at least followed, but he follows from a distance. Remember through the study that we'll do today and on Saturday, remember the community back in Rome in the year 70 when this gospel is brand new and they're hearing it in this form for the first time. Remember they're under persecution. The persecution is sporadic, erratic. They might have already lost loved ones. Sometimes they disappear, never to be seen again. Other times they're publicly murdered, and we know very well what happened to them. Sometimes they've been given a severe beating, which is going to leave them with scars that'll last the rest of their life. The whole community is going through this. And so everybody has different first-person stories of how the persecution is being played out in their own circle and in their own house church. So it was quite understandable that people would continue to follow Jesus, but do so at a distance, if you will, because it's just too scary, too dangerous to be out loud about it under those circumstances. So Peter's following from a distance, but he goes right into the high priest's courtyard. He found a seat with the temple guard. So he's sitting in the outer courtyard with the security detail. And he begins to warm himself at their light, at their phos, P-H-O-S, from which we get phosphorescent, the Greek word for light. It's not only a fire, but it's a bright place in the dark. So Peter is in this bright place in the dark with the ones that just help with the arrest. The chief priests with the whole Sanhedrin were busy soliciting testimony. Testimony is the word martyrion, from which we get martyr. The martyrdom is borrowed from courtroom language. It's simply the word for witness. A person who's a witness in a trial today in Greek is a martyrion. So to be martyred is to stand witness to some truth. Anyway, the Sanhedrin were busy. They were collecting testimony against Jesus that would lead to his death, but they couldn't find any. So there's the bind. They need witnesses that are going to say what they want to hear because they've already drawn a conclusion. They've already decided how they want this to go. And they then need to line up people who will say the things that produce the outcome that they want. So it's rigged. But they couldn't find any. Many spoke against him falsely under oath, but then their testimony did not agree. They didn't get their story straight. And that was evident. Some, for instance, on taking the stand, testified falsely by alleging, "We heard him declare, 'I'll destroy the temple made by human hands.' Another says, 'And in 3 days, I'll construct another not made by human hands.' Their testimony just didn't agree. Remember, the temple was destroyed in the year 70 in Jerusalem. No stone left upon a stone, as Jesus had said earlier. The Romans depopulated the entire city of Jerusalem and only let back in people that they pre-approved. No Jew was allowed to live in Jerusalem after the destruction of the temple in the year 70 at the conclusion of the Roman-Jewish War. So that's recent history, kind of like 9/11 was for us back, those years ago, really raw. So the idea of Jesus saying that he's going to be the one to destroy the temple, well, the temple did get destroyed, and that becomes an issue. The high priest rises to his feet before the court and begins to interrogate Jesus. "Have you no answer to what these men testify against you?" But he remains silent and makes no reply. Once again, the high priest interrogates him. "Are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed One?" And if you're following along in a Bible that says, "Are you the Messiah?" it's more true to the Greek for it to be translated, "Are you the Christ?" because Christos is a Greek word. Messiah is a Hebrew word. And this text is written in Greek. So it's more true to the original text to say, "Are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed One?" Well, remember, a Christ is someone who has been chrismed, who had oil poured over their head. Diana, back to that baptism scene 18 years ago. No sooner did we pour that water than I reached for the chrism, which then went on his head. While Jesus wasn't chrismed in chapter 1 of Mark when he was baptized with water by John the Baptist. A spirit descended upon him like a dove, so he was baptized in water and spirit, but not chrism. They keep asking him, is he the Christ? Is he the Messiah? But he keeps saying, you won't understand that until you see the manner of my death, because you think a Messiah, a Christ, is going to be the successor to King David, who's going to rouse up an army, who's going to be all about military might or coercive power. I'm the kind of Christ that's going to lay down his life for everybody else. You're not going to understand at all who I am until you see the way I die. And where they're asking him if he's the Christ. Well, he just did get anointed by that woman that was so bold, who came into the banquet and broke open the alabaster jar and poured the chrism, the whole contents of it, all over his head. They started scolding her. He said, leave her alone. What she had, she did. She's anointing me ahead of time for my burial. So he mentioned already that he's been anointed, and he's been anointed in the appropriate way, not as a future military king, but as a dying and rising Christ, as a dying and rising beloved of God. Are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed One? Well, his answer is, I am. 2 words, I am, ego eimi, which were the same 2 words that Moses heard at the burning bush when he said, what's your name? You want me to go and tell Pharaoh to stop behaving badly and free the slaves, the Hebrew slaves? Who are you? He's going to ask me, on whose authority do I say this? Who are you, voice in the burning bush? And God just says, I am. And it's unconjugated. It's the infinitive form of the verb, like to be, because that's called infinitive because it doesn't have time. It's the form of the verb that isn't past, present, or future. It's outside of time. That's what infinitive means. So he speaks in the form of the verb that could be, I was who was, I am who am, I will be who will be. It's the infinitive form of the verb be. He just says, I am, and you'll see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of the power and coming on the clouds of heaven. Well, at that, the high priest tears his robes. It's like the word rent. We don't use that word very much. When we use the word rent, we think of leasing an apartment, but to rend like violently, not just to tear something like a sheet of paper, but to rip through something. He tears his robes in a big display of fury and says, what further need do we have of witnesses? You've heard the blasphemy. How does it appear? And they all concurred in the verdict of guilty with its sentence of death. So the testimony that's given isn't given, the testimony that was given at this trial accomplished nothing. It conflicted each other, but Jesus gives the testimony that for them they think seals his doom, because they ask him if he's the Christ, and he says, I am. And they consider that blasphemy with its sentence of death. Remember that the Jews didn't have the power to do capital punishment, only the Romans did. So this is a Jewish court in the high priest's house, but they've sentenced him to death, even though they don't have the power to carry it out. Some of them then begin to spit on him. They blindfold him and say, play the prophet. You know, who is it that's hitting you, essentially, while the officers manhandled him. So this has all gone very bad. It's all very dark. It's covered with untruth and violence and insult. And out in the courtyard, Peter is in this one little spot of light with the guards that arrested Jesus, trying to stay in some little bit of light while he's following from a distance. But now the scene is going to shift back to him. They're really concurrent scenes. While this is going on inside the high priest's house, Peter is near the gate of the outer courtyard in this little, around this little fire. Now, Peter is down in the courtyard. He's down in the courtyard, which suggests the scene that we just saw where Jesus was being interrogated was upstairs indoors. So Jesus is upstairs indoors, Peter's downstairs outdoors and near the front gate. One of the servant girls of the high priest comes along. And if I were casting this as a play, I'd like you to think of first of all, it needs to be a girl. Remember, they didn't really have teenage years. They didn't have a concept for adolescence. A girl went from child to woman when she had her first period. And that's what a bar mitzvah was for a guy. There was a ceremony to say you're not a boy anymore because today you become a man. And they didn't really have a societal concept of adolescence or teenage years or anything like that. You had one status or the other. This one is a girl. So she's less than 12. Maybe she's 9 or 10. Let's say 10. If I were casting it, I'd not only pick about a 10-year-old girl, but I'd pick one who was small for her age, maybe a little pasty complexion, maybe kind of thin, a little wisp of a girl, like the most non-threatening person you can find, and maybe with a squeaky voice, a little whisper of a voice, because we're seeing feminine and masculine alongside one another. Peter is usually a pretty outspoken guy, kind of rough and tumble, fisherman guy, tough guy. And I would pick this little tiny wisp of a little girl who says she noticed Peter warming himself, and she looked at him more closely and said, "You two were with Jesus of Nazareth." So Peter's accuser is going to be this tiny little wisp of a thing who accuses him, and then he denies it. I don't know what you're talking about. What are you getting at? Then he went out toward the forecourt. So he also leaves that scene and moves away from his accuser, the little girl, and moves out toward the forecourt. And at that moment, a cock crowed. The servant girl, keeping an eye on him, starts again to tell the bystanders, "This man is one of them." Once again, he denies it. A little later, the bystanders take up the chorus and say to Peter, "But you're certainly one of them. You're a Galilean, aren't you?" At this, he calls a curse down upon himself and begins to swear, "I do not even know the man you're talking about."
It's just cream.
Okay. And immediately the cock crow was heard, and Peter recalled the prediction that Jesus made to him. "Before the cock crows twice, you'll deny me 3 times. He broke down and he began to cry. Okay. Somebody's got an open mic and is talking to somebody, so please. Okay. It's the story is told in a very dramatic form. You kind of get to see it, just in case you're trying to follow Jesus from a distance, you get to see how that turned out for Peter. We were told that Peter tried to follow from a distance. He tried to have it both ways and deal with the darkness by being near the little bit of light that he could find. When he gets asked about, "Aren't you a follower of his?" Think Rome, think the persecution. Some little somebody, it didn't necessarily need to be a Roman centurion at your door. It could be your next door neighbor's 10-year-old girl. Anybody could turn anybody else in. And in fact, all those phrases where we're told that, that family relationships would be pitted one against the next, mother against daughter-in-law, son, all that stuff. That's part of the way that it played out. That's why those verses are in there, because sometimes there were family members that were saying, "This is ridiculous. Why don't we just go back to worshiping the God of Rome the way they want, so they'll leave us alone?" Within the same family, there's going to be, or within the same house church, there's going to be all kind of ways that people deal with this reality of the, not just the threat of violence, but it's arrived at their doorstep. How's that going to play out? Well, we see that in Peter's denial, but he breaks down and cries at the end of it. He's really heartbroken. Remember, his name was changed from Simon to Peter, which means rock, but now he doesn't look like a rock at all. He looks like rocky soil, which we were warned about back in chapter 4, that there are going to be people who appear to be solid rock, but in fact, what they are is rocky soil. And when persecution comes, they'll be scorched. So right now, it's really heartbreaking. We're watching Peter, the leader of the followers of Jesus, in the act of denying, and he realizes it, and he's breaking down and crying. About as sad as you can get. Then we're at chapter 15. And immediately, which is the way Mark starts so many sentences, because he's breathless to tell this story. And immediately, it was daybreak. The chief priests with the elders and scribes, that is the whole Sanhedrin, have reached a decision. They bind Jesus, let him away, hand him over to Pilate. Pilate interrogates him. Remember, Pilate has the authority to put Jesus to death. That's why they're bringing him to Pilate. They've already decided that that's what they'd like to have happen, but they need a Roman official to sign off on it. Pilate interrogates him and says, he doesn't ask him if he's the Christ. He asks him, are you the king of the Jews? And Jesus's reply is, you're the one saying it. You say this. He never wanted kingship. It never was the right fit. Every time, it doesn't happen so much in Mark as it does in the other Gospels, where when anybody brings up the word king, Jesus runs for the hills. He goes the other way. But right now, are you the king of the Jews? Are you the one? You are the one saying it. In John's Gospel, you'll get that Johnine literary technique of getting into the mind of a person. Mark hardly ever does that. Remember, Mark is really about explosions and demons crying out and so on. It's much more rugged storytelling, where John is more like a British film, really long, slow character development and all that. Well, here, are you the king of the Jews? You're the one saying it. The chief priests, meanwhile, bring accusations against him. Pilate interrogates him again. Surely you have some answer. See how many accusations they're leveling against you. But greatly to Pilate's surprise, Jesus makes no further response. Then there's this aside. Now, on the occasion of a festival, he would release for them one prisoner, the one that they asked for. There was this prisoner named Barabbas, jailed along with the rebels who had committed murder in an uprising. Doesn't say that Barabbas has killed anybody, but he said he was at least rounded up with people that did in an uprising. Remember, this stuff is happening around the year 30 or in the early 30s, but for people reading into the year 70, there was an uprising. It started from 67 to 70 that culminated with the destruction of the temple, the depopulating of the city. It was an utter disaster. There was a prisoner named Barabbas who, along with the rebels who committed murder in an uprising, the crowd comes to press their demand that Pilate honor the custom of releasing somebody. Pilate says, do you want me to release the king of the Jews for you? He was aware, of course, that it was out of jealousy that the chief priests had handed him over. Meanwhile, the chief priests incite the crowd to have him release Barabbas instead. So pause that for a minute. Barabbas, the Bar is son of, Jesus could have been known as Jesus of Nazareth. That was his first name was Yeshua, Jesus is translated. He would have either be called Jesus of Nazareth, because that was one of the ways that people were identified by their place of origin. During his public life, he would either be called Jesus of Nazareth or Jesus Bar Joseph, Jesus the son of Joseph. Both of those would have worked. Barabbas means son of the Father, Abba, Father. So you have this irony in Mark, which I think is why the story would have worked without giving Barabbas a proper name. The story would have worked just fine without a proper name. You could have said, and there was a guy there, and he had been involved in an insurrection. The story would flow just fine without the proper name, but the proper name translates son of the Father. So you have the irony of a crowd saying, don't give us the son of the Father, we want the son of the Father. Remember back in chapter 1, Jesus hears the voice say, "You are my son, my beloved." We know that he's Jesus is son of the Father, but in this highly ironic scene, the chief priests are trying to get them to crucify Jesus, and instead are trying to have the crowd shout out, "We want the Son of the Father, give us Barabbas." And they shout back, "Crucify him." Pilate protests, "Why? What crime has he committed?" And they shout only the louder, "Crucify him." Pilate, who wished to honor the agreement, like King Herod back in chapter 6 at the death of John the Baptist, he's listening to a crowd. Remember, Herod had made that promise about, I'll give the dancing girl, I'll give you half my kingdom if you do this dance. What do you want? I want the head of John the Baptist on a platter. She had to go to her mother or to find out what to ask for. Well, now we have a similar scene. Pilate, who's paying more attention to the crowd than he is to justice, wants to honor the agreement, and he releases Barabbas to them. And after that, he had Jesus scourged, then handed over to be crucified. When we get to John's version, when we do that study, this scene is going to be way more expanded, and it's going to be on stage. And Pilate is going to be the one who's ironically on trial because he can't make up his mind, because he's conflicted. He knows that Jesus is innocent, and he's being pressured to pronounce him guilty, and he can't make up his mind. And so he goes over to the window to hear the crowd, and then he comes back over to Jesus. And in the middle of if I were staging it, I'd put the seat of justice right in the middle, something that looks like a throne that gives him the authority to pass the sentence. But he's wandering back and forth to both sides of the stage like somebody that is going to make up their mind mostly based on some political expedient. How do I get out of this? Another way of getting out is to wash your hands of a thing. But another way is to finally see which way the winds are blowing and go that way. But in Mark, we don't really get all of that. We just get this very terse scene. He wants to honor the agreement, satisfy the crowd. He hands Jesus over to be scourged, which in John's gospel is to try to satisfy a bloodlust incrementally. Rather than have him crucified, Pilate thinks in John's gospel, what if I have him beaten up and bloodied and bring him back out here? Maybe that'll be enough for them. It'll be some sort of intermediate punishment that might satisfy them. And then, of course, in John's gospel, when Jesus comes back out bloodied, dressed in a purple robe with a crown of thorns, the crowd wants even more. But again, all of that doesn't apply to Mark. Mark's just got this one little scene that says they scourged him and handed him over to be crucified. The soldiers now lead Jesus away into the hall known as the Praetorium. At the same time, they assemble the whole court. They dress him in royal purple, weave a crown of thorns, put it on him, and begin to salute him, "All hail, King of the Jews." Continually striking him, Jesus, on the head with a reed and spitting at him, they genuflect before him and pretend to pay him homage. When they had finished mocking him, they strip him of the purple, dress him in his own clothes, and lead him out to crucify him. All right. I'm going to pause here. I think there's a question or comment or two in the chat. Does somebody have something that they wanted to say to all of us?
I was curious about the witnesses and the testimony that was given.
Uh-huh.
I know eyewitnesses aren't always very accurate, but it seems strange to me that they would discredit what they said because of little word changes and discrepancies between little words, because Jesus did say something about, if the temple is destroyed, I will rebuild it. But it wasn't that he was going to destroy it. It was, you destroy it and I'll rebuild it. So there was reference to him making a statement like that. And there were testimonies, but obviously they didn't get the wording right. So I was curious what your thoughts were on why they discredited it rather than just taking it at face value, even though it wasn't accurate statements.
Well, the way I was taught to treat these documents was, your default setting should be, what does the text say? And if the text doesn't expand on a thing, make note of that. The text doesn't answer our question. The text just says what the text says. And then when you ask a question of the text, you have to remember that you're going beyond it, which is okay. It's just otherwise you would be the word for that is retrojecting. After the fact, you're forcing something in, like wedging it, like trying to get Cinderella's shoe on the stepsister's foot. It's not a real fit, although you can try that if you want. What does seem clear to me is that this wasn't a well-coordinated event, that if you really had thought through this and planned on it more, and you were going to try to get witnesses to concur in the same line of specious argumentation, that didn't happen. It was all too hasty for that. And Marx lets us know that this wasn't about getting to honest truth anyway. It wasn't a court that was trying to determine actual factuality. There was already a preconceived conclusion that they were working toward. And if on the way there happens to be this little hiccup of the fact that some of the testimony doesn't line up too well, no big deal. As long as we get to the finish line, that we have, it's prejudgment. That's exactly what prejudice. That's what prejudice means, to judge ahead of time what the conclusion is. And that's what they're doing. All right, well, from there, let's keep going. They lead him out to crucify him. Now we're at chapter 15, verse 21. There's a man named Simon of Cyrene. He's the father of Alexander and Rufus. He's coming in from the fields, and they press him into service to carry the cross. One interesting thing here is scholars, whenever they see somebody named who's not a famous person and who only has a bit part in the story, haven't you ever been in a play where you had some bit part? I was once in the play A Man for All Seasons, and I was the boatman. I rowed Thomas More across a river, and I did it poorly. That's why I was given that role, because I wasn't really a very good actor. But I only had a few lines. I couldn't flub it too badly. I ended up being the co-director because I was really better at, behind the scenes rather than in the play itself. But here, this character, the story would work just fine if somebody's brought in service to help carry the cross. The story would work just fine without knowing that his name was Simon and that he was the father of Alexander and Rufus. That suggests that somehow that Alexander and Rufus might have been members of Mark's community in the year 70. Their father would be a generation older, back from the year 30 when this was happening, or thereabouts. And it could be a connection between the events in the story and the people hearing it 40 years later. I just think that's a kind of an interesting speculation anyway, that there must have been some reason to bring up this proper name to the Markan audience. It must have meant something to them. Anyway, the Simon of Cyrene, the father of Alexander and Rufus, was coming in from the fields. They press him into service to carry the cross. When they bring Jesus to the site of Golgotha, which means skull place, they try to give him wine drugged with myrrh, but he wouldn't take it. They crucified him and divided up his garments by rolling dice for them to see what each should take. It was about 9 a.m. when they crucify him. The inscription proclaiming his offense reads, "The King of the Jews." Note, in this gospel, Jesus gets crucified at 9 a.m. Does that surprise you? If you were raised a Catholic in your childhood, were you ever made to start getting quiet at noon? Turn off the TV, turn off the radio, be still, read a book, say your prayer, go to church from 9 until 3, because Jesus is on the cross. That follows other traditions, especially John, but in Mark, Jesus ends up being on the cross for 6 hours, from 9 in the morning until 3 in the afternoon. And even then, Pilate in Mark's gospel is surprised that he's died so quickly, because crucifixion was designed to prolong the agony. If you wanted somebody to be dead quickly, you could have done what Herod did to John the Baptist and lop off their head. That was not the point. It was a public shaming that was designed to be protracted and public to make an example of whoever it was you were crucifying. So anyway, it was about 9 in the morning when they crucify him. They crucified with him 2 robbers, one at his right, one at his left. People kept going by, blaspheming him, tossing their heads and saying, "Ha, so you were going to destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days. Save yourself now by coming down from that cross." That was probably one of the accusations hurled at the Christian community during this persecution, that if this guy of yours, this Jesus of Nazareth, was really God, well, then he'd be powerful and he would have been able to save himself from that fate. It's so stupid what you believe in. You know, why would you believe something so absurd? If that the all-powerful one would die like that, it doesn't make sense. Surely you could save yourself by coming down from that cross. The chief priests and the scribes join in and jeer, "He saved others, but he can't save himself. Let the Christ, the King of Israel, come down from that cross here and now so we can see it and believe in him." Those who had been crucified him likewise kept taunting him. So in that sentence, verse 32, you don't get that scene of the good thief. You know, today you'll be with me in paradise. That story's not there at all. All you get is there was one on his left and one on his right, and they both jeered at him, both taunted him. When noon comes, darkness falls on the whole countryside. Well, that's strange. Why would it be dark at noon? High noon. Because Jesus is going into all the dark places. He did that right in chapter 1 after his baptism. Remember, the Spirit drove him out into the desert. He was with Satan and the wild beasts. He confronted demons in possessed persons. He dealt with people both on both sides of the lake. He goes out to the Syrophoenician woman. He's encountered the dead in Moses and Elijah on the Mount of Transfiguration. He sets his face like flint to go to Jerusalem and confront the corruption in the temple and in the holy city. Well, now it's noon and it's dark. The whole countryside, this darkness lasts until mid-afternoon. At that time, Jesus cries out in a loud voice, and then it goes into Hebrew, "Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani," which means, my God, why have you forsaken me?" But it's actually Psalm 22. He's praying the beginning of a psalm that that starts with heartbreak and abandonment, but that reasons its way by the end of the psalm to, "But however this works, I know that you're trustworthy." It's very much like his prayer in the garden, "Take this cup away from me, however, your will be done and not mine." It's a psalm that has very much the same story arc. This is horrible. I feel abandoned. However, I trust. A few of the bystanders who hear it remark, "Listen, he's calling on Elijah." Misunderstanding is a big theme that runs all the way through Mark, and here it is again, this time on the cross near Jesus's death. He's been on the cross by this time like 5 hours or more, and he's calling out and saying, "Eloi, Eloi," which is my God, because Eli was one of the names of God, one of the titles of God. But it sounds very much like the name for Elijah the prophet. Do you remember at the end of the career of Elijah the prophet, He doesn't die like most prophets do. Most prophets speak truth to power, and eventually the power kills them, or at least beats them, silences them. But Elijah had a different fate. At the end of his life, he's somehow taken up to heaven in a fiery chariot, remember? And at the Passover meal, some friends of mine, I just called them yesterday, they're Jewish, and I knew that they'd had the Seder, and had it with COVID and everything, so crazy times in their life. But they, at the Seder table, you count how many guests you're going to have, and you set one extra place in case Elijah comes back. That's the way it's done. So Elijah disappears into the skies in a fiery chariot. When Jesus is crying out, my God, why have you abandoned me?" Some of them mistake it and say, listen, he's calling on Elijah. Like Elijah might come back in his fiery chariot and take Jesus off the cross. It sounds like he wants, beam me up, Scotty, that he wants off this cross. They think that that's what he's saying. Someone runs off, soaks a sponge in vinegar, sticks it on a reed, and tries to make him drink. The man said, now let's see whether Elijah comes to take him down. So this colossal misunderstanding is still happening. Remember how Jesus said, don't tell anybody until the Son of Man has died and risen from the dead? Well, he's all but dead now, but the understanding is still blockheaded. It's still, there's no receiving of what's actually going on. And then in the next sentence, it says, then Jesus, uttering a loud cry, expired, which in the Greek, ex means out of, like an ectomy, tonsillectomy. Ek means out of, and spiration is breath. When you breathe out, you expire. You did it all night long. You inspired and you expired. Inspire, expire. In with the good, out with the bad. He expired. And you and I all have an expiration date. We don't know when it is, but we have one. It's coming. Well, Jesus expires. He breathes his last. In Mark, it says, at that moment, the veil in the sanctuary was split in two from top to bottom. Remember what was split in two at his baptism? Of course you do. Dasha, you're reaching for your microphone.
Yeah, the sky.
The sky was split in two. And when the sky was split in two, the Spirit descends, the Spirit, the breath, descends on him somewhat like a dove. Spirit comes to him and inspires him. He inspires Spirit. Now he expires. In fact, when we do study John, in the Johannine story, there's no Pentecost later on. They're not gathered in the upper room and waiting for the Holy Spirit, and then they have this shattering thing that feels like tongues of fire, and they speak in different languages, and they're inspired. They're given the gift of the Holy Spirit. In John's gospel, when Jesus expires, his breath leaves his chest and is now completely airborne. The fullness of the Spirit that used to be in the body of the now dead Christ leaves that body and is now breathable to anyone who wants it. All a person has to do is breathe in, because it's universal. Anyone who wants it can breathe it in. Well, here, Jesus has expired. The veil of the sanctuary is torn in two, like the sky was at the baptism. Whatever separates human and divine, and whatever religious thing separates one kind of person from another kind of person, remember the way the temple was built, where the Gentiles could only come in the forecourt, and then the women could only come in the next part, and then the men could only come in the next part, and then the priest in the next part, finally get all the way to the Holy of Holies, and almost nobody can go in it. All of that is split. The whole system, the veil in the sanctuary is rent in two from top to bottom. The centurion, listen to this because it's a critical turning point in Mark's gospel. the centurion, who might have been present at the arrest, who might have been next to that fire where Peter was denying that he knew Christ. And a centurion was not a lowly guy. A centurion was somebody in charge of 100 people. That's what from the word century. This is a person who had authority over 100 others. He's a Roman authority, like the kind that show up at your door and haul off your loved ones and persecute them. A centurion standing guard over Jesus, seeing the manner of his death, declares, surely this man was Son of God. So in Mark's gospel, the first human being, now the demons were shouting this out back in the early chapters because they thought it's okay for us to just shout it because none of these humans are going to understand it anyway. We can mislead them with these religious titles. Jesus tells them to be still, to shut up, be muzzled. He also tells everybody else, don't speak about me yet because they'll just misunderstand. Wait until after I've died. Well, he just died. He just expired. And as the breath left his body, the centurion who stood guard over him, on seeing the manner of his death, declares, clearly this man was Son of God. So it's this colossal irony for Mark's community that the first person in the story that gets Jesus's identity right is a Roman centurion. Who knows what that really felt like? For us, it's a detail and a study. But what would it have been like to understand that last week a centurion showed up at your neighbor's door and hauled them away? And in Mark's gospel, the person who fully understands who Jesus is the centurion who watched him die. Surely this man was Son of God. There were also women present looking on from a distance. All right, so it has this element of positive and negative in it. They're at least following. They made it all the way to the cross, which lots of others didn't. But even they are not completely heroines in this story. They're mixed. Yes, they made it all the way to the cross, except they're looking on from a distance. Okay? So it's got both things going on. You can easily find your place in this story. You might have been a follower of Jesus for a long time and have many trophies to show for it. On the other hand, there are also the moments when you know that you betrayed or you were far less than what you're capable of. Anyway, they're looking on from a distance. Among them were Mary Magdalene, Mary, the mother of James the younger, and Joseph, and Salome. You know, notice it doesn't say Mary, the mother of Jesus in Mark. These stories are very divergent, the four versions of this story, but we get Mary Magdalene, Mary, the mother of James the younger, and Joseph, and Salome. These women had followed Jesus when he was in Galilee, and they had attended to his needs. There were many others who had come up with him to Jerusalem. As it grew dark, it was preparation day. Well, how much darker can it get? It was already dark at noon, remember? Now, on top of whatever the noontime darkness was, it's growing even darker. Well, Jesus has just died. It's growing darker than dark. It's the preparation day, that is the eve of the Sabbath. Well, it's the eve of the Sabbath. And remember, for the Jewish people, midnight was not the dividing line between one day and the next. Sunset was. So the day ended when the sun went down and it was dark. That's when the next day began. The day began at sunset. So it's the eve of the Sabbath. Joseph of Arimathea arrives, a distinguished member of the Sanhedrin. He was another who looked forward to the reign of God. He was bold enough to seek an audience with Pilate and urgently requested the body of Jesus. It's an interesting detail because so often in the story, Luke makes a great big deal of the fact that poor people got Jesus more than wealthy people did. Matthew writes to a community that's of the trading class, and whenever money is mentioned in Matthew or Luke, Matthew's monetary values are always higher than Luke's. in Matthew, there'll be a feather bed, and in Luke, the same story will have a straw mat. But in here, it's one instance where the universality shines through, because even somebody who was part of the Sanhedrin, who was a Jewish religious authority, is the one who it says is bold enough to do this one thing. He wasn't bold enough to stand up and speak on Jesus' behalf at the trial, but he was bold enough to do at least this. That's probably the way that things worked out in Mark's community. There were probably all kind of variations of what constituted courageous behavior. Some people might have gone, if the Roman soldiers were at their door, somebody might have had the courage to go out into the street and say, lock the door behind me. Maybe if I give myself up, they'll leave the rest of you alone. You know, that kind of courage. There might have been all kind of other gradations of it. But here he's bold enough to at least seek an audience with Pilate and request the body of Jesus. Pilate was surprised that Jesus would have died so soon. He summons the centurion and inquires if Jesus had died. Learning from him that Jesus had died, Pilate released the corpse to Joseph. Then, having brought a piece of linen, so it's the second time we have this bit of white cloth. This time it's going to be a burial garment. Have you been to a Christian burial where there's the placing of the pall on a casket? When the casket is first rolled into the church, possibly next to the baptistry, if a church has the baptistry in the front. I remember when we buried my dad, we had the baptismal garment that my grandmother had knitted for him. And instead of putting the church's pall on the casket, we put the little thing that he wore when he was a baby, that our grandmother had made, right? So there's this little bit of cloth that's a reminder of baptism and of the dying and rising of baptism. They take him down and wrap him in a little bit of linen, and they laid him in a tomb which had been cut out of a rock. He rolled a stone across the entrance or the door of the tomb. Meanwhile, Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of Joseph, saw where he had been laid. So they're still following, still from a distance. There's just all these valences going on in this story. It's not simple black and white, good guys, bad guys. It's this muddled scene of people struggling and trying to do something. Peter both betraying himself and Jesus 3 times, and then realizing that he had done it and crying. Joseph of Arimathea having enough courage to do this one thing, even though he didn't have sufficient courage earlier in the story to try to prevent what happened. It just shows, and I'm about to go into preach in a half an hour. This is sometimes called Spy Wednesday. I don't like it because it puts too much focus on the person of Judas and why did he do what he did. If only Jesus had picked more carefully and hadn't chosen that good for nothing to begin with, it wouldn't have come to this. The blaming of Judas for the whole series of events, it doesn't fit in Mark either. Anyway, we're at the end of the hour and we've made it all the way to the end of chapter 15. If you read ahead in chapter 16, it only is 8 verses long, where the story written by this author ends. The way that the author ends the story is so dissatisfying to his audience that within the first 10 years after it was circulating, there are at least 3 other independent endings of it that get tacked on. Lots of people decide we don't like the ending of the story and we're going to rewrite it. And your Bibles probably have a version that's verses 9 through 20 that are considered canonical and inspired, even though we know very well that they're not written by the same author. And then there's a couple other ones, one called the Shorter Ending and another called the Freer Logion. Look around at that material between now and Saturday, if you will. The way that this story ends is so jolting and unfinished that it begs to be finished. but the finishing of it isn't going to be done by writing a few words that get tacked onto the end. The finishing of it is going to run right through your life. The finishing of it is going to be you taking up the story and living it out in the complexity of your own life. So I'll see you on Saturday from 10 until 11. We only have 8 more verses to study in this particular study, which we can probably finish in the first 15 minutes or so. I'll invite you to email me between now and then. Lisa, are you still here?
Yes, I am.
Sammy couldn't be here today because he was at the doctor. Would you mind, can you see what's in the chat? And
Yeah,
maybe
absolutely.
cut and paste it into an email to me? I do it myself, but I have to get ready for mass.
Yeah, absolutely. Let
Okay.
me do that. As long
And-
as you don't close it on me, I can do that. Let me, if you give me one extra moment, I'm going to screenshot it and then I can put them all in a Word
When you
document.
do favors for me, I'm not going to put any stumbling block in your way. You just do what you need to do.
Very
And then if
good.
any of you have other questions, just send them to me in an email. And I'd be happy to fold those into what we do together on Saturday. The Lord be with you. May God bless you, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. See you on Saturday. God bless you.